Just when you think you're done with transfer portal announcements and players going into the portal and all that, one more player goes into the portal. Let's talk about the latest Pitt loss to the transfer portal, what it means for the Panthers, and then some other things too. A couple of guys got invited to the scouting combine, the NFL scouting combines. We'll talk about that, update some transfer stuff. We'll bounce around to a bunch of different football topics here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's Wednesday. It's the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Panther-Lair.com. You see it right along the bottom there, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's a place to get all your Pitt sports coverage, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for the Pitt sports coverage that you need, and the message boards where you like to interact with other Pitt fans. Best online community of Pitt fans, if you ask me. You didn't ask me, but if you did, that would be the answer. It's right there, Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we do all these Morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday. A little bit of Pitt sports talk to get your day started. We have our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 p.m., like we're doing tonight at 8 o'clock. And then we have post-game shows we do after every road basketball game, like we did after the Pitt-Virginia game last night, right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Go live and talk about the game, see what everybody thought. It's always interesting and interactive and fun. And then we have press conferences and interviews and all kinds of stuff like that right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So if you want to make sure you don't miss any of our Pitt video content, subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can turn on notifications and get an alert sent right to your phone. And that way you won't miss anything. And also while you're at it, like this video. We'd appreciate that as well. So some more transfer news came out yesterday. Kind of became sort of official, or it was announced yesterday, but some, what's the word, like, sharp-eyed Pitt fans noticed this already, that Carter Johnson was not on the roster posted on Pitt's website. Pitt posted their spring roster. It's not complete yet. A couple of the newcomers don't have jersey numbers, but somebody happened to notice Carter Johnson wasn't on there. This was like last week when somebody noticed. Finally, yesterday, Johnson announced that he's going into the transfer portal as a grad transfer. Not a total shock. There were some rumors in December or maybe early January that Carter Johnson was going to go somewhere else for his super senior season, or go, I forget if it's his super senior season or senior season. I have the scholarship board in front of me of what this would have been for Carter Johnson. It would have been his super senior season, so his 6th year of eligibility, final year of eligibility. Going through December, even he said, because we reached out to him, hey, are you going to go back to Pitt for your extra year of eligibility? And he said, yep, I'm going back to Pitt, H2P and all this stuff. Well, January, he started hearing rumors that he was looking to potentially go into the portal. But then nothing came of it, so it sort of disregarded it and, moved on. But apparently those rumors were well-founded. Pitt took him off the roster, and Carter Johnson's in the transfer portal. It's a weird time to be going into the transfer portal. It's because as of, like I say, when we noticed that his name wasn't on the roster last week, I checked with some sources as far as, access to the actual transfer portal, and they said, no, he's not in there. So he wasn't officially in the portal, even as late as last week, which makes me think he's been taking classes at Pitt. So he's not going to transfer until after the spring. Wonder if something happened there, or wonder what happened there. Something changed. And I mean, there's a million possibilities. To speculate on what it might have been is not really, doesn't really benefit anyone. I think you can speculate for yourself and come up with your own possible explanations. But what it comes down to is Pitt now is one tight end fewer than they had last season, or one tight end fewer, I shouldn't say than last season, but one tight end fewer than they projected to have for this season. Obviously, they brought in Jake Overman, the transfer from Oregon State. They signed Malachi Thomas, recruit out of Georgia, last week. So they added a high school guy to go along with Overman coming in as a transfer, and then obviously returning Gavin Bartholomew, and then Cole Mitchell and Jake Renda. And look, I mean, we all, I think we're all on the same page thinking of what they need to do at tight end and what they should do at tight end and where the ball should go at tight end. I mean, Gavin Bartholomew is one of the playmakers in this offense. And Cade Bell certainly spoke highly of Bartholomew at his introductory press conference last week. Seems really excited to work with Bartholomew, seems excited to get the ball to him. It seems like Jake Renda could be a guy who gets some opportunities as well. Maybe finally capitalizes on that athleticism he's shown, where he's almost more of a big receiver than a tight end. Previous Pitt staffs have talked about using Jake Renda. He had a big spring last year. Well, that big spring didn't turn into anything in 2023. But maybe Cade Bell finds a role for him in the offense, and they end up getting something out of him, getting more out of Jake Renda than they've gotten to this point. When it comes down to it, though, and I think it was our good friend NFL Gimpy on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, pointed out that there's probably not going to be a lot of 2 tight end sets in this offense. I know Cade Bell talked about moving Gavin Bartholomew around and using him a lot of different ways, in the backfield, in line, out in the slot, split out wide. But you still would think, even if you're moving him around and putting him in different spots, that you're probably not going to, if you move him out of sort of the inline traditional tight end position, and put him somewhere else on the field, I don't know if it necessarily means you're going to put another tight end out there and go with 2 tight ends. Even though I, like you, would like to see Gavin Bartholomew work out of the backfield more as an H-back or even a fullback, because he had so much success playing in that kind of role in 2021. You still, I would think it would be a lot of 11 personnel, right? One running back, 1 tight end, and 3 receivers. It seems like that would probably be this offense's base formation. That's largely what it was last year, to be honest. And now you're going with a guy who's probably going to roll with that even more. And so it's not hard to look at it and think, all right, Carter Johnson may have considered his opportunities to be, diminishing instead of increasing. Despite the fact that Carter Johnson had his most success late in the season when Nate Yarnell came in. Final 4 games of the year, which, we really, I'm including this because he had a 50-yard catch against Notre Dame after Nate Yarnell came into the game. But in the final 4 games of the season, Carter Johnson caught 9 passes for 141 yards and a touchdown. Really, if you look at the last 2 games, the 2 games that the 2 games that Nate Yarnell started, sorry, I was looking at the stats, the Boston College and Duke games, Carter Johnson in those 2 games caught 8 passes for, what's the math here, 91 yards and a touchdown. So pretty productive for Carter Johnson, particularly compared to what he had done up until that point. Prior to the Notre Dame game, he had 3 catches for 34 yards. So that's the first 7-8 games of the season. He had 3 catches. The final 2 games, he has 8 catches. And so he seemed to have some chemistry there with Nate Yarnell. Might have been something that he would have looked to build on. Maybe it might have been something that Nate Yarnell would have been looking to build on, or Cade Bell might have looked to build on. But I think you can kind of, you can understand if Carter Johnson might have looked at this situation and said, not sure how much I'm going to play here. Not sure, if my role is going to increase the way I want it to, or who knows. Like I said, we don't really need to speculate too much on, there's not a lot that comes from speculating too much on why Carter Johnson decided to leave, but ultimately he decided to go. That is the 13th Pitt scholarship player to decide to enter the transfer portal this offseason. Of course, 2 of those 13 came back. Brandon George and Nate Temple went into the transfer portal and then came out. So technically, net gains, Pitt lost 11 guys to the transfer portal. Or it's not even a net gain. Those guys came back. And I don't think, we don't count George and Temple as players who picked Pitt out of the transfer portal, right? Technically they came to Pitt from the transfer portal because they left Pitt and went into the transfer portal and then came to Pitt from the transfer portal. Let's take them out. Let's just say that they have 11 players who left the team for the transfer portal and 12 who are coming in from the transfer portal. That's not counting George and Temple coming in from the portal. And I think that's interesting, where Pitt actually ended up +1 on scholarship players from the transfer portal this offseason. I don't think that's been the case any of the previous couple of years, where they brought in more transfers than they lost, but that's the case right now. And that's even with Carter Johnson going, where they have 11 guys who have left the team for the portal, and 12 that they brought in. And I think that's interesting. it's interesting for a number of reasons. It's not like the number of guys they lost went down drastically, and so it kind of worked out that way. It was sort of a numbers game. I think last year they lost about 12 scholarship guys to the portal. This year they're sitting on 11. And obviously that number will have to increase, and we'll talk about that in a second, but you would expect more attrition over the spring. But as they sit here right now, they're +1 on the transfer portal. I would imagine, I wouldn't be surprised if they bring in 1 or 2 more guys from the portal. And they're obviously going to lose more guys to the portal. So it'll end up, they'll end up minus on the transfer portal, having lost more guys than they gained. But sitting here on February 14th, they're +1 from the portal, which I think is interesting. Those other guys that they lost, just to find it. I had my sheet pulled up of the guys that they lost to the transfer portal, and then I closed that window to look at Carter Johnson's stats. See, this is what I get for looking up Carter Johnson's stats. Guys that they lost to the transfer portal. Linebacker Aiden Henningham went to Albany State, which is actually in Georgia. Buddy Mack, defensive back, safety / linebacker, went to South Carolina, I think possibly as a walk-on. I haven't really fully confirmed that. Linebacker Bengali Kamara went to South Carolina. Defensive tackle DeAndre Jules went to South Carolina. South Carolina is becoming Pitt South this offseason. Stephon Hall, defensive back from Central Valley, went to Youngstown State. Long snapper Byron Floyd went into the portal, went to Buffalo. Trey Anderson, the offensive lineman, went to Utah State. He's from Utah. That makes sense. Sam Okunlola, defensive end, went to Colorado. And then 3 guys are still sort of swinging out there. Wide receiver Addison Copeland, running back TJ Harvison, and now Carter Johnson. I haven't seen an announcement from Copeland or Harvison about them going anywhere or signing with a school or picking a school. And so I assume they're still kind of swinging out there, waiting to find a new home. But that's sort of the update on where that stands. And we'll keep an eye on Carter Johnson. Obviously, wish him the best. Good luck with everything. And, hopefully Harvison and Copeland are able to find a new home sooner rather than later. So that's the latest on the transfer portal report. That's where Pitt's at right now with transfers coming and going. But the other news that came out yesterday, and it was the NFL Draft Combine invites went out, and 3 Pitt players were invited to the Combine. I wonder if you would have guessed these 3. Like if I told you, you can guess Pitt had 3 players invited to the Combine, who would be your top 3 guesses? I'm guessing it would probably be at least some of these guys. I think MJ Devonshire, everybody probably would have guessed, right? I mean, it seems to make the most sense. I think he had a lot of name recognition and notoriety due to the special teams work. He obviously had a couple big pick sixes over the course of his career. That would make sense. Matt Gonsalves is another invitee, the offensive lineman. And again, I think that would make sense too. I'm not terribly surprised about that one. And then Bub Means is the third guy. And I don't know if I was surprised. I mean, I know I was driving the Bub Means hype train all summer, so I shouldn't – I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I didn't think much of him, but I didn't know if he would earn an invite to the Combine. We all know he finished the season very well. He was playing really, really well down the stretch at Pitt after a slow start to the season. A turnaround that's probably not unconnected to the changing quarterback that happened around the same time he started rolling. But I didn't know if he did enough to put himself on the radar for the draft combine. Obviously, the physical tools are there. Obviously, he's going to test really well, and he should impress people that way. But I didn't know if he did enough, even over the course of the final 8 games when he was really playing well and putting up big numbers. I didn't know if it was enough, to get him over the top, to get him that invite to the combine. But he got invited, and that the last 8 games, as much as we talked about it at the time, and I know I talked about it a ton at the time. I talked about it. I feel like every week I talked about it on the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. During those final 8 weeks, I feel like I talked about it every week, and it wasn't all 8 weeks. I mean, the first of those final 8 weeks was the Virginia Tech game where Bub Means caught a 75-yard touchdown pass, and that was his only reception for the game. But I think after that, sort of week by week, Means kept getting more and more consistent and more productive. And when it finished, in the final 8 games, he caught Um, 35 passes for 650 yards and 6 touchdowns. He averaged 18.6 yards per catch. This is over the final 8 games. Virginia Tech, Louisville, Wake Forest, Notre Dame, Florida State, Syracuse, Boston College, and Duke. Now, obviously, they went 2-6 in that stretch, so his performances didn't always lead to wins, although he had 4 for 71 and a touchdown against Louisville, 3 for 78 and a touchdown against Boston College. Season high for receptions, season high for basically everyone. Everything was against Wake Forest. He had 9 for 109 in a score. But if you take those final 8 games where he had 35 for 650 and 6 touchdowns, you project that over the course of a 12-game season. Like if he had played at that level all 12 games, what would his numbers have been? It would have been about 52 or 53 receptions, 975 yards, and 9 touchdowns. And it's not a 1,000-yard season, but I think, obviously he gets to a bowl game. If he plays in a bowl game, he's got a pretty good chance of getting there. But it really would have gone down as one of the most productive seasons in recent Pitt history. Now, obviously, Pitt entering 2023 was coming off back-to-back years with a 1,000-yard receiver, Jared Wayne in 2022, Jordan Addison in 2021. But before that, Means' numbers, if he had that kind of season, 53 for 170 or 53 for 975 and 9, that would have been the most receiving yards dating back to Tyler Boyd in 2014. It would have been the most receiving touchdowns. Addison had 17 in 2021. You got to go back to, Jester Weah had 10 in 2016. Boyd never caught more than 8 touchdowns. And really, it goes back to the Walt Harris era. Those last 5 years of the Walt Harris era where Antonio Bryant had 13 and 11 in back-to-back years. Larry Fitzgerald had 12 and then 22. And then Greg Lee caught 10 touchdown passes in 2004. After that, after Lee, in 2004, you have to go 12 years before another Pitt receiver catches more than 8 touchdown passes in a season. So, this is the era that Bub Means was in with how he was playing in the final 8 games. I don't think that was an accident or a mistake. I don't think it's something you can kind of pretend didn't happen. It did happen. I think he played at a pretty high level and a pretty consistent level over those final 8 games. I think he was pretty good. Obviously, it didn't translate to winning games, but he played at a pretty good level himself individually. And my thought on Bub Means is that it's going to be tough for him to catch on and stick in the NFL, just because I think while he grew and developed a lot over the last 2 years at Pitt, I think he's still relatively raw as a wide receiver, and I'm not sure if those skills that he needs to grow and develop are ever going to come at the level they need to come in order for him to play in the NFL for a long time. But the physical tools are there. There's no question about the speed. There's no question about the strength. There's no question about the size. He's got all of those things. I think he did show quite a bit of improvement in his pass catching this past season. In addition to route running. I think, and I said this the other day about the Tyquan Underwood situation with Tyquan Underwood leaving Pitt for the NFL. If there was a feather in Underwood's cap in terms of player development, it's Bub Means, a guy who was a defensive back at Tennessee before he went to Louisiana Tech, came to Pitt as a very raw athlete, very raw wide receiver that really didn't have a lot of the necessary wide receiver skills. The finer points, not just the physical attributes, but the finer points of playing the position. And by the time he was done, again, he was on pace for almost 1,000-yard season. And I think that's a credit to Underwood. I think Underwood gets a little bit of credit for Means' development. Maybe they'll draft him in New England and he'll get an opportunity. You obviously wish the best for all of those guys. I think Means and Devonshire will test really, really well, or they need to test. They should test really, really well. They should both be able to jump out of the ceiling, run really fast 40s, and all of those things. If they don't do a great job at the combine, they'll always be able to come back, and probably will come back to Pitt's Pro Day. I think in March is when they usually hold it, and they can try and put on a show there. Matt Gonsalves is a guy that, we've been really high on for a long time for how he's played and how he's done and how he carried himself at Pitt. Great kid, great player. Unfortunate to see his career end the way it did with an injury, but he still had Yeah, I think he was looking forward to having that 1 year where he came into the season as the clear starter and held on to that all season long. I mean, that kind of happened in 2022. Gabe Hoy was hurt entering training camp, so they knew that Gonçalves would be the starter, but he could have had like his year. I think 2022 basically was his year. He decided to come back for one more season as opposed to transferring or trying the NFL then, and he got hurt. You know what? In the third game, the West Virginia game. I think he's a good offensive lineman. I think he can play in the NFL. I don't know where he's going to be drafted. I don't know, what all of that will look like, but I think he's a good player who will play in the NFL. We'll see about Devonshire and Means. I think those guys will have a lot to prove and a lot to show, but they'll get a chance to do it at the Combine. So, congratulations to them for getting the invite. Good luck to them as they move forward with it. All right, we have the live show tonight, 8 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, so make sure you tune in for that. You don't want to miss it. And, and then we'll be back with another Morning Pitt tomorrow, talking more Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, anything that's going on, and even some things that aren't going on, things we have to just kind of conjure up on our own. We'll talk about it all right here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt videos. Go over to the website and check out Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for all the Pitt sports coverage you can handle. And yeah, have a great Wednesday. Hope your week's been a good one so far. We will check in with you tonight on the live stream, and then we'll talk to you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.